It's InstaScope time. So we're at this job today because she had some mold remediation done in the attic, and they successfully remediated the source, but then the question came up, what about the air quality in the house? Did it affect the air quality? What about the contents in the house? So we're gonna check on that today and see if there's any sort of contamination we should be concerned about. And they also actually added a ventilation system because there wasn't enough ventilation in the house. So now they have some fresh air coming in, and the homeowner's been home all day, so now's a perfect time to check the carbon dioxide levels and see what's going on with that and see if they've been somewhat successful. So let's go ahead and grab this bad boy and get started. So the first thing I like to do is hit that power button before setting it up, because the VOC sensor takes a little bit to acclimate, and I want to make sure we get some accurate results with that. We're going to punch in the customer's info and get started. What's cool about the InstaScope is once you power it on, it just connects automatically to the iPad, so we're ready to rock. Before I start my baseline sample outside, I actually just want to purge the machine. So what is that? It's basically just a HEPA filter that you put at the tip of the wand, and once you run the first sample, it's basically just going to purge anything that might have been in the tube. This is really helpful if you had a job beforehand that was super contaminated, super dirty. You can clear that to get an accurate reading for the next job. So we're gonna get started with the baseline outside. Now, why is this important? Well, I wanna know what is the normal environment outdoors, right? So there's a normal amount of mold and bacteria and pollen outside. What are the particulates outside right now? All these things are important. That way, when we go inside, we have something to compare to as far as what's normal, right? If the mold levels are really, really high today outside, seeing a little bit inside today might actually make sense. So understanding what that is gives us better comparatives as we're looking inside. Carbon dioxide is also really important. Whenever we're trying to measure ventilation indoors, we have to compare that with what's normal in the environment outside. If there's a high level of carbon dioxide indoors compared to the outside sample, we know there's likely a ventilation issue that we need to look into. So we're gonna let this run and get some results. All right, we got our outdoor results, and the info is pretty useful. Small particles and large particles outdoors looking fairly low. We have some mold and pollen flying around outside. We got temperature and humidity, which is looking pretty good. And we got our carbon dioxide levels, our VOC levels. Let's go inside and get started. Let's get started in the Florida room. Now, there was actually a remediation done in this room on this wall. There was some water damage coming from a roof, but there was no mold sampling prior to the remediation. So the question that the customer has is, okay, what about the actual contents? Is the air quality okay? Should we do any cleaning? And so I want to start by actually doing a sample in here. So we're going to call this the Florida room. The InstaScope is designed to get a more representative sample. So that means you walk around the room and you collect air from throughout the space versus just sitting right there in the center. Now, airflow is pretty complex. So you have little pockets, little spaces where air is moving that you might not actually capture otherwise if you're just sitting right there in the center of the room. We just finished up in the Florida room, and I'm gonna scan the rest of the house, and once I get the whole house scanned, I'm gonna do some resuspension sampling, which is a little bit different. So let's knock this out and then I'll show you what that looks like. All right, I think we're done scanning the house. Before we get started on the resuspension sampling, the customer did mention that she was concerned about the sink because there was an old leak here. She said it was very minor, but while we're here, might as well check it with a source track, right? So we're gonna check it real quick before we get started with some of those resuspension scans. So what is a source track? Basically, you stick the wand where you think there's mold. That's it. So if we're worried that there's mold growth behind this vanity, it's very easy to take the wand, put it back behind where the plumbing is, pull back an escutcheon, and look, we already got the sample for the bathroom, so we know what the ambient levels are in here. Now we're just gonna compare it with the vanity. All right, I'm gonna put this right here just so I can actually watch it. And before anything, I'm just gonna stick it back here without disturbing or touching. I just want to see what these levels show. Are they going to go up? What about the particle levels? It's probably going to be a little dirtier in here, so seeing higher levels would be normal. Right now, looks pretty good. So I think it's time for me to disturb it just a little bit. I'm going to tap on the back of the vanity. If there's anything going on behind it, it might kind of burp it out of the wall, so to speak. So I'm seeing the particle levels go up, but the mold is staying the same. That's a really good sign. All right, sample complete. That looks pretty dang close to the bathroom sample. So I don't think there's a problem here. We're able to tell immediately, look, we don't see anything visibly, there's no moisture, and we didn't see any mold or anything behind the vanity. We're locked in, we're done. No need to send a sample to the lab. I think it's time for resuspension sampling. So what is that? Well, think about it like this. There are mold spores and pollen grain and all these other things flying around in the air, and eventually they're going to settle on surfaces. So if there was some sort of contamination here, that contamination could have just caused a bunch of mold spores to settle and not necessarily be airborne. So if I take an air sample in here and it's a still room, you might not actually catch a contamination. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna disturb the crap out of the place, let things kick up and fly up in the air, and then we're gonna sample again. What we can do is we could take the floor to room sample that we had before, we can compare it with the resuspension sample and say, is this abnormal or is this an expected amount of dirt and pollen and mold resuspending? There is going to be an elevated amount. It's normal, we're disturbing stuff. But the question is it an elevated amount? So let's take a look and see what we find. So we got our resuspension sample all set up. Before anything, I want to close the doors because if we are trying to do resuspension sampling, you know, if I want to do multiple rooms, I don't want to disturb this room and then it just goes right into the next room. I want to keep them kind of separate. And that's actually why we like to do resuspension sampling at the end of everything. I don't want to resuspend this room, go right into that next room, and then try to do a still sample and have it skewed. So we did the whole house, we've scanned the whole house. Now I'm going to resuspend with the InstaScope. This is what I'm going to do. Act like a crazy person. You know, when the customers come in and they see you doing this, they say, I gotta get this guy some crazy pills. But it's for your health, lady. Shut up. So, I'm not trying to go too crazy in here, but I do wanna disturb a good amount of dust. So what I might want to do during a resuspension sample is get a little bit closer to the furniture than I did last time during the still samples, just because I was beating on it. A lot of those particulates might not have made it that far, so being able to capture it a little bit close to the source where I resuspended, hey, why not? I have an infinite amount of samples I can run, so. So I'm looking at the results. Right away I can tell, likely not contaminated. I mean, it went up, of course, we expected that, but it didn't go up that much. And it all went up in the same ratio. What do I mean by that? Well, the non-biological particulate doubled, so things like skin cells and other dust. But the mold also doubled, the bacteria doubled, the pollen doubled, so everything doubled. That's normal, right? So I doubled the amount of dust in the air. Now, what would have been weird is if the non-biological stuff stayed the same, but the only thing that was resuspending was mold, and mold was going up 10x as I disturbed this stuff, right? So why is everything else staying the same? The pollen's staying the same, the particulates are staying the same, but the mold is going way up, way out of ratio for what's normal flying around in the air. That is a great indication of contamination, and we're not seeing that here. Yeah, looks good. We're gonna do one more room to be safe though, so let's check the master. So we are doing some resuspension here to get all this stuff off. Looking good to me. Alrighty, Jane, so we're done. Your air samples look pretty good. Here's your mold samples. They're all in the green, everything looks good. You'll notice that there are two that say resuspension. These are ones where we basically just kicked up a bunch of dust to try to figure out what was going on the contents, because I know you were worried about contamination of the contents. And you'll see, like the Florida room, for example, it went from 3,000 to 6,000, so it did double, but you don't have to be worried about that because everything doubled when we stirred stuff up. I mean, it's expected, right? So the pollen doubled, the non-biological dust, everything doubled. That's normal to see that. It would be weird if we saw the mold 10x and then everything else doubled, but we're not seeing that. And same thing is true. The master bedroom actually stayed about the same when we were resuspending, but the particles and everything else still went up. That's a really good sign. Chemicals look really good. And now that you have the fresh air intake, you can see that the carbon dioxide levels are looking pretty good too. So if you look here, those are the outside levels for CO2, around 600 parts per million. If your house was elevated, it'd probably be around 1,300 or more. And the whole house is sitting under 1,000. It's looking pretty good.
Great.
I think we're wrapped up here. If you need us to come back in a few months and check on things again, we can.
Okay,
So,
thank you very much.
you're welcome.